Welcome everyone, my name is Mikey Mhenna. I'm your host today. It is my honor to introduce our special guest, Adib. Adib Dada is the founder of The Other Dada, TOD, Regenerative Consultancy and Architecture, which his mission is to activate projects across architecture, design, and art by creating unconventional links at the frontier of science. Going beyond traditional architecture, his work employs a holistic and biomimetic design approach with nature and people at its core. As a fervent supporter of Beirut's contemporary art scene, Adib served on the supporting committee of the Beirut Art Center and sits on the board of Tandem Works and Seja Foundation. He's been recognized in the Apollo magazine's 40 Under 40 as a patron of the arts in the Middle East. Adib, welcome to Africa.
Thanks for hosting me for this conversation tonight.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you on. So Adib, we have you on this outline series because we're interested in talking to you specifically about your work around urban reforestation. Before we get started with that, why is that an appropriate term? And is it an appropriate term to describe the work you're doing, urban reforestation?
So actually, it's more appropriately referred to as urban afforestation because these forests have disappeared from this place for a while. So we consider that we are afforesting a site that wasn't a forest before, but that was actually meant to support a forest ecosystem.
Okay, interesting. How long has that term been in use? Like, why is that an appropriate term?
It's been quite a long time ago. I mean, the methodology we follow by Dr. Miyawaki has been around since the 70s, but I think the term was there even before that.
Okay, cool. So we are going to be looking at a specific project of yours. I think before we get started, as somebody who lives in Beirut and you live in Beirut, I have benefited indirectly from your work. So I want to thank you for doing your work. And let's watch 2 clips real quick that give a sense of the work that you're doing so that those of you who are not familiar become a little more familiar. Here it is again. Can you hear it? Adib, can you hear this? Okay, that's one of them. And then let's play one more just to give people something to hold on to.
لنرجع نتصل مع الطبيعة فينا نروح على الغابة أو فينا نجيب الغابة لعنا. باستعمال تقنية مياواكي تكبر غابات محلية وكثيفة بحيالله محل حتى هون. ايه هيدي غابة صار عمرها سنة وبلشت تعمل تغيير. مشان هيك كل ما شفنا أرض فاضية أو بقى عنا تراب أو بصيص من الأرض خلينا نتذكر إنه في غابة ناطرة لتنطلق. نحن جيل إعادة الطبيعة البرية.
Beautiful. So the way this interview is structured, there's a before, during, and after, for those of you who are new to the outline structure. And we're going to go through a series of questions that are going to try to explain your process in putting the project together. So let's start with the first one. What were you doing before you started working on this project?
I'm trained as an architect, and I'm specialized in green buildings and environmental architecture. So I've been mostly working on architecture, interior design, working on some art projects as well. And so this project we're looking at is a residential project in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia that had a very big focus on sustainability, healthy materials, and so minimizing the materials that were imported using mostly local materials. And that also translated into the landscaping approach, which relied mostly on native and adapted species. Because in the city of Riyadh, we have very little water. So we were looking at species that didn't need much water to survive.
Okay, so, all right. I'm starting to see the threads. Let's keep on going. This question I always feel like reveals something about the sort of the genesis of the project. So what was the first version of the name of this project?
It was Beirut River 2.0. So this kind of like upgraded version of the river until we dropped that.
So for those people on the call who may not know much about what the term Beirut River implies, what is the state of the Beirut River now, and what was it like at 0.0?
So basically, the original river is what you saw in the videos in the natural parts of the river. So a really beautiful, healthy ecosystem. The state of it when it gets into the city, so the last 15 kilometers of that river, is that it's been encased in concrete. And it's been transformed from a healthy performing ecosystem into basically a sewage infrastructure that's carrying raw sewage, industrial waste, solid waste from all the different municipalities upstream through the city, and then dumping all of that into the Mediterranean Sea, which kind of makes it like a local problem, but with a big global impact.
And when did that transformation happen?
So that happened in 1968 is the actual, the year that marks the death of the river, which was no longer an ecosystem. And so that's, so before that time, the river was a really social place. People used to come from the different sides of the river. They used to meet. They used to even cross the river when the tide was low, especially in the summer. And they would host picnics and feasts and do, religious feasts and other types of like festivals and things on the side of the river. And historically, the river also used to provide fresh water to the city of Beirut and to the Roman city that existed there before, and even going back thousands of years before that. So it's always been an important source of fresh water, an important also cultural resource and space, public space for people to meet and gather. And now is what you see in this picture. So on the right side is this brownish, sludgy water. So that's in the summer, the only water that is left. So in the summer, there's private water bottling companies that are at the source of the river. So they pump out most of the water, package it in plastic bottles, sell it back to us as consumers. So for those who don't know, in Lebanon, we don't have drinkable tap water. So we have to buy our water in plastic bottles mostly, or plastic like big containers. And so the private water bottling companies take out this water, the agricultural lands take out whatever is left. So in the summer, all you're left with is the raw sewage and industrial sewage that is being dumped in the river.
Okay, let's keep on going. So what is the date this project actually started?
So 2 dates. 2013 is that kind of moment when I was reading the paper and I saw, that they had this kind of like big controversial project on the river. So that kind of sparked my interest on doing something, starting to seriously look into what was happening on the river. And I had just come back from doing my graduate studies at NYU and seeing like all of these amazing kind of nature-based solutions and innovations that were happening, and then coming back to see this in Lebanon, it really sort of like kind of hit me that I needed to do, to start looking into it at least. And the forest making project started in 2019. So it took like 6 years of kind of research and many failed experiments and many failed attempts to revive the river, up until I kind of like understood that, my project was just too broad, too big, too ambitious, and very much intangible. So it was very difficult for people to do anything else but just like clap and say, bravo, great work. But then no one would actually engage and help out with the project. And so then 2019 is it's the time that we actually planted the forest. So that became something actually very tangible that we could refer to and that people could rally around.
Just what month in 2019 for those of us who are very familiar with Beirut's history?
So we planted in May 2019. So that was just before the revolution.
Yeah.
And then the second part. So this picture is taken in November 2019. So that was during the height of the revolution. And I believe it was maybe Independence Day. So our action for Independence Day was to be planting a forest instead of,
that's
leading by positive action.
About as revolutionary as you can be. Okay, cool.
So that was our kind of political act. Like a lot of people don't think of planting as a political act, but for us, it was really a very political act that we are reclaiming these spaces that the powers or government or whatever, that the current broken system had deemed as of no value. They had turned it into a wasteland. And so for us, it was really about like getting the community to reclaim those spaces and turn them into to green public space.
Yeah. No, I'm not being facetious at all. I think it's deeply a revolutionary thing to instigate that type of awakening. So for sure. Okay, when and where were you when you had sort of this light bulb moment?
So that's actually kind of interesting because it wasn't really a light bulb moment. It was more, a very good friend of mine called Elise, who's from Belgium. And we keep in touch very often. And she's been to Beirut many times. And she's been following up on my Beirut River 2.0 project. And after I had, I think, given a lecture, which she had seen, she reached out on WhatsApp. That was in October 2018. So like almost 3 years ago to the day. And she's like, hey, like about your river project, what do you think about planting a forest next to that river? So for me, obviously I was very intrigued. And so, we set up like a time to speak. And that's when she actually told me that she had met this forest maker called Shubhendu Sharma. And she offered to put us in touch. And that's what actually kickstarted the whole project.
Yeah, because now I think of them as being intertwined, this idea of the river project and the forest project. I think of them as being intertwined, but clearly one followed the other. Okay, so I sort of know the answer, or a partial version of the answer to this, but I love asking this question. Who are the 5 unlisted co-founders who weren't actually involved? but inform the work and the vision and the mission of the project?
I mean, so definitely Dr. Akira Miyawaki, who pioneered that the technique, so which is called after him, the Miyawaki method of afforestation.
Is there a book that people can like actually go out and buy?
The book is in Japanese. It hasn't been translated to English, so we have kind of like parts and excerpts of that. But no, there isn't like just kind of an easy thing that you can get. But you can, I mean, there's a lot online that you can sort of read and research, and there's Afforest have a lot of resources that that you can actually check out, and I can send out maybe after. Cool. Some resources that you could share. So he's our mentor, whom I've never met, who I was supposed to meet actually in April 2020. So I had, my trip booked, a whole 2-week workshop set up with him. So we were a bunch of forest makers from different parts of the world going to meet him and do a workshop with him. And then COVID happened, so we canceled that whole trip because he was 91 at the time, so his team wasn't comfortable with strangers flying in to see him. And he unfortunately passed away a few months ago, so didn't get to meet him. But he, his work informs, is at the basis of what I'm doing. Dr. Suzanne Simard, who is the one who kind of discovered this communication, how trees communicate, and she proved that trees actually communicate between each other. So really fascinating work. I highly recommend you look her up. Paul Hoken, who basically was an environmentalist, and he started this thing called Project Drawdown, which is kind of a listing of the 80 top solutions, proven solutions, for fighting the climate crisis. And so he lists actually reclaiming planting degraded lands using the Miyawaki method as one of the best ways to do that. And this is also supported by other research from different universities. But Paul is just an incredible writer as well. He just came up with a new book. So Paul. And also the film, or the cast from the film Demain, this French film about the state of the environment and the climate crisis, and a very kind of upbeat film looking at real pioneering innovative solutions, from economy to renewable energy to food systems and all of that. So really beautiful film. And finally, I studied biomimicry. I have a big reverence for nature. So the whole ecosystem of the forest, from the plants to the birds, the insects, the fungi, like all of these things that organisms that kind of go unnoticed.
Can you define this term, biomimicry?
Biomimicry is basically, it's the conscious emulation of nature's principles. So it goes from the fact that nature has been around for 3.8 billion years. It has evolved organisms that have managed to adapt to this ever-changing environment that was very much inhospitable 3.8 billion years ago, and to turn it into a hospitable planet. So organisms have learned how to deal with excess CO2, with excess pollution, with extreme heat. So all of these challenges that we are facing, nature has, organisms have been able to adapt to these challenges over time. So instead of reinventing the wheel, if we kind of humble ourselves enough and really look and listen to nature, all the sustainable solutions are there. So that's biomimicry in a nutshell.
Beautifully said. Jeez. Okay. So what are some of the things that created friction that slowed you down before launching?
Actually, everything went pretty smoothly from, once we had this idea, it was very quick to get the team from Forest out to Beirut. It was quick. It was pretty easy to get the funding to do the project. It was such a cool idea, and it resonated with a lot of people. The thing we ran into a problem with was that our initial goal was to do this project in Burj Hamoud, because this is where a lot of our research was based, and this is where we found that there was the most negative impact on the community from the pollution of the river. So we really had this dream to do the project there. And then after chasing the mayor for 3 months, basically turned out that he wanted something for himself other than a free public project for his constituents. And so we had to kind of decline, and very quickly had to find an alternative location for the project. And this is where we were very lucky to be put in touch with the mayor of Sin El Fil, where we ended up doing the project, and who's become one of our greatest supporters and very open to any new project that we come up with. So yeah.
Okay. So this question, is it that somebody had to do this project, or is it that you had to do this project?
So it actually started out as somebody has to do something about this. And then, you wait, and they're like, okay, the more research you do and all of that, it kind of organically grew into I have to do, or I'm actually, I started doing something about this. So yeah, so it was a very, I didn't think that I would be the one working on this.
Okay, great. Okay, let's actually talk about the process of actually doing this. So who were some of the early believers and team members that helped shape the project as it stands now?
I mean, we were a really tiny team. Dana Harake, who's a landscape architect, and Katya Zahawi, who was an architect. They were both part of my team. And, this project came along and we're like, okay, I guess we're turning into forest makers overnight. And, but I mean, my wife really pushed me in this direction because she had seen me struggling with this river project for so many years. And she'd always been saying it's such an intangible project and you need something tangible. So, she really recognized the power of having this kind of very tangible action of planting a tree being a trigger for something bigger. And then, of course, the mayor of Sin El Fil, who's the first one who gave us the benefit of a doubt. We had never done this before, but he was kind of very generous in his help and in trusting us with this project.
So I don't want to step on some of the later questions, but give us an idea of how quickly there is tangible change. So if every municipality in Beirut, if every mayor in Greater Beirut said, Adib, pick any plot, you have our support. How quickly could things actually change the day-to-day life of the residents of those neighborhoods?
I mean, listen, it really starts from the day that we start working on the project, because we try to involve the community as much as possible. We raise awareness, we invite them to visit the site, we invite them to help us on the site preparation, on the planting, and then eventually on the maintenance of it.
Yeah. So
it really starts at the beginning, and then the project itself doesn't take much to get off the ground, given that you've secured funding, then the approval of the municipality. Yeah. The works on site take a week or two, depending on the scale of the project, and then the planting work takes also about a week or less, again depending on the scale of the project. So it's a really quick thing. Within a month, you could have a full-blown project that is already implemented. And then we do around 2.5 years of watering and maintenance to get, to support this forest, after which it becomes completely self-sufficient because it's a native forest. And so we're really mimicking the mature forest that would have existed there. So in around 2.5 years, it becomes completely self-sufficient, and it's just kind of left to its own devices, and it will thrive and it will reach equilibrium. Some plants will, most plants will survive, some will not, some will be taken over by other plants, and that's totally fine.
And just, again, I'm kind of going off script here, but what are the size dimensions that are worth thinking about? Could it be like in one of those, in the Vimeo clip, you showed pictures of sidewalks, and could it be as small as just
So the smallest we've done is 1 square meter.
Cool.
So that's like a 1 by 1 square and a sidewalk in downtown Beirut in Solidaire, where they love to put in exotic species with, like a dedicated irrigation system, lots of fertilizer and chemicals and all of that. So during the revolution, so we have been trying for the past few months to get approval from Solidaire to plant like a tiny forest there, and they wouldn't grant it to us. So again, during the revolution, we took that time, and we went with some of the people from the Martyr Square, and we planted in an empty sidewalk. So we planted these 6 tiny forests on the sidewalk, and basically a year later they were destroyed, and they were replaced again by an exotic tree, like one singular exotic tree. So that's the smallest that you can do. I mean, and Dr. Miyawaki actually came up with this technique for the city of Tokyo, which is one of the densest cities in the world. So space is really, really scarce. But he wanted to show that you could get a lot of benefit from doing many, many, many micro forests throughout the city.
Yeah. So I kind of stepped on this question a little bit, but the question was, if you were to explain it in phases, the project phases, how would you describe each phase, time, goals, works, methods? So I heard you explain basically there's a first 2-month period, and then there is a sort of a 2-year period, and then beyond that it's self-sustaining. Is there anything that you missed?
Yeah, basically. So, I mean, the way it starts is that you have a site. So we select a site that is suitable, that has enough sunlight, and that has access to natural soil, whether it's on the concrete, like in the picture that you're showing right now. This is a school playground that was destroyed by the blast. The playground was renovated, and we came in and we kind of like destroyed the concrete paving and reached the natural soil, and that's where we planted this forest, which is about 10 square meters. So this has around 40 trees and shrubs. So the first step is selecting the site. After that, we travel to the closest natural forest, the closest to the site. So in our case, it's about 30 minutes away from Beirut. It's in the Beirut River Valley. It's in the Beirut River watershed. And so we go there with botanists, and we study all the types of herbs, shrubs, and small trees and large trees that exist. And it's done in a very specific way. We're really looking at what is the diversity of species, but also what is the proportion of species relative to each other. And so it's really sorry. Okay, Hayat. That's my daughter. So we're looking at the diversity, but we're also looking at the relationship between these species. Which species like to be next to each other? What is the relative proportion? So we have mostly oak, and then it's maybe pine, and then laurel, and then hawthorn, and so on. So really understanding how the ecosystem functions, how this mature ecosystem functions. And we're replicating as closely as possible this mature ecosystem that has evolved over hundreds and thousands of years. So we're replicating that on the first day of planting. Then we order, all the things that we need to improve the soil. So urban soil is usually dead. So all types of biomass, straw, husk, compost, all sorts of things. Then we engage the community, we prepare the site, we dig it, we clean it, we add and mix all of this biomass to enrich the soil completely organically. And then finally it's planting time. But, so we plant, we put up these sticks, we mulch so that we can retain moisture in the ground, and that we create a habitat for all the beneficial microorganisms that live in this layer. And then finally, we do watering and maintenance for the next 2.5 years.
Let me ask you a question. So you said something, you said, I'm going to try to reproduce an ecosystem that has sort of been iterated over thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. Do you know precisely what that ecosystem is, or is it site specific? Like you get to Sin field and you're like, oh, what's supposed to go here? And that's different than, that's different than Damour, or that's different than,
Definitely. I mean, in Lebanon, we're blessed with having so much biodiversity and so many different types of ecosystems. So every time we go to a new location in Lebanon, I mean, for Beirut and Greater Beirut, we have this survey that we've initially done. But if you go to a coastal area, then we need to do another survey. When we did a project in Zouk Musbih, we did a whole new survey. When we worked in Farzabien, which is a mountain, like snowy region, that was a whole other survey that was done. So it's really, the survey is really looking at the closest natural forest that you have and mimicking that. So it's very site specific.
Very cool.
So that's.
Let's keep going. And okay, so what are some of the hinge points that transition, that change sort of the course of the project, and how did you avoid or embrace maybe scope drift?
So, I mean, the first kind of hinge point was we won the D&AD Future Impact Award, which was something, like someone sent us, oh, there's this award we think would be super relevant to you. The deadline was the next day. So we kind of we scrambled to put something together. And at that time, like our forest was only about 2 months old. So we really had no clue how successful it was going to be. So we just kind of submitted, and we ended up winning that section, which is about future impact. So it really gave us a huge boost of confidence to see that this kind of international organization was recognizing the future impact that our project would have in terms of the river and the communities alongside the river and the biodiversity that we would be helping. So that was kind of like a real good boost. Another hinge point was when we managed to get a private client. So for us, it was always we're doing this in the public space. It's all pro bono. We raise funds, we do crowdfunding and things like that. But then we had someone approach us and I have a land that I don't want to do landscaping on. I want it to become self-sufficient, and I want to restore the ecosystem of that land to what it used to be. So that became an interesting approach that we hadn't thought of before, that yes, actually, people could be interested in this as an alternative to conventional landscaping, because I mean, you put in the effort for the first 2 years, and then you just kind of let it thrive on its own. And then, of course, sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
Then, of course, the explosion that happened in Beirut, where we felt the whole city and the people were bruised, and so we understood by doing these forests how meditative and healing it was for us to do these. And so we really started after the explosion focusing on forest making as a healing tool, focusing on getting doing projects. So as we mentioned earlier, projects in schools that were destroyed by the blast. And this project this image that you're showing is our unofficial memorial to the victims of the blast. So since we couldn't do an official memorial because the municipality didn't want it, and no one wanted to recognize this. So we as we were planting a site in Basta, which is one of the areas that were affected, we decided to do just kind of a very simple symbolic gesture, which is writing down the names of each of the victims and on a piece of paper, and then planting this along with every tree that we were planting. And so this metaphor of this, birthing new life and the cycles of life and decay of a forest, but it's also a symbol of hope. So we hope to have people come to, not to a memorial that is kind of bringing them down, but to a memorial that is actually going to lift up their spirits.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to keep going. What were some of the most instructive failures during over the last couple of years?
I mean, I think the biggest failure is that we didn't manage to help the river itself. So yes, we are. I mean, you know, the whole like Beirut River 2.0 was about bringing Beirut River back to life. So this failed miserably because we couldn't get traction, we couldn't get funding, we couldn't get, you know, again, it was too big and intangible. And so it is still the case that our project sits alongside the river. It is restoring. So since we couldn't bring the river back to life, we brought the forest ecosystem that existed alongside the river. So we are in a way kind of helping the larger ecosystem, but the river itself, we still haven't managed to do something about that, about the pollution entering the river, about, you know, the concrete that's there and all of that. So for me, that's kind of like the biggest failure that we eventually hope to address, or eventually, hopefully, someone else will address that.
And this is the next question is related. What are some of the critiques that of the project that influenced your work, internal or external critiques?
I mean, so many. Anything from like random people on the street, you know, stopping and commenting on like, you know, why are you planting this species? Like, you know, like we don't plant this. You shouldn't be planting this here.
عندك gardenia?
ايه it's like وين الجاردينيا وليش حاطط هيدا هيدي بتجيب حشرات and you know like stuff like that. So yeah, so kind of out of blue, just stopping there like in their car and be like, you know, kind of giving you advice and screaming at you like, you know, you should be doing this and not that and all of this. To, you know, to like ecologists actually and like, you know, knowledgeable people criticizing the methodology that we were using. So the Miyawaki method and, you know, like it's too dense, you know, why are you including shrubs, you know, like all of these things. So so you know, you kind of learn to field all of these because we have this real belief and we've done our research. So we have this real belief in what we're doing. And then, of course, kind of like this little nagging voice in my head that's always like, you know, like questioning if this, the impact that we're having, you know, is that impact enough? Like, is it enough to do that next to the Beirut River? Is it enough to do this in Zoomosbeh? Is it enough to do this in Lebanon? And so it kind of keeps on like, given the, I mean, the situation, like the you know, the crisis that Earth crisis we are going through. So we really have been looking at how do we exponentially scale the impact of what we're doing.
This brings us to sort of the after. In this case, there's no real after because the project's in process, but let's start with this question. What did you fundamentally misunderstand about the problem that you're solving?
I mean, at the beginning, we did a lot. I mean, especially when I was researching the river before we even started doing the forest, I really thought that the community cared about fixing the root cause of the problem. And then after, you know, so many interviews and surveys and community meetings and all of that, I kind of like understood that they're actually under so much stress from the situation in Lebanon that's been dragging for so many years, that they're mostly interested in just solving their day-to-day problems. So, you know, lack of parking space and the horrendous stench of the river, like that's the only thing they cared about. So like their solution was like, let's just cover the river with more concrete and make and you know, like have parking on top of it. So of course at the beginning I was just kind of like horrified, but then you start understanding where they're coming from, and you see that you know, like again, the project cannot just be like, okay, this is what we're doing. It's, you know, so that's for me, I think that was one of the fundamental misunderstandings. It's like, how is this going to improve their day-to-day life?
Yeah, because you know, there's that whole idea of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's you know, trying to explain how this actually makes their life better. And that argument can be made with confidence, but humility, because you have to understand you don't have full understanding of their lives. But I want to ask you a question, which is, you alluded to what the root of the problem is. What is the root of the problem? If you were to explain it to like a 15-year-old, what is the root of the problem?
Bad mismanagement of our natural assets. So basically, I mean, the system that we are part of in Lebanon doesn't look for long-term solutions, but looks for very short-term projects to finance. And so this leads to very much like ill-advised projects. I mean, dams and concrete beds and all of this, are being actually physically destroyed all over the world. And we are still building dams, and we are still building concrete reservoirs and doing all of that. So root cause, I mean, kind of, it's kind of a broken system, corruption, greed, so many.
And is the idea that this sort of decentralized action creates examples for people to like latch onto, and so that there can be broad scale change at a political level, but also a broad scale change on a consumer level, where people start to actually understand that they can use their vote, but they can also sort of vote with their spending power.
I mean, I think for me, the saddest part is that I feel like, the Lebanese people have been kind of like, robbed of their dream, of their like ability to dream and to dream big. They just want, just the tiny little thing that's going to make their life slightly better and slightly easier. Yeah. And I think this is something very much intentional on the part of the current system and the government. So I think that's the saddest thing. And by showing these projects from the tiniest ones, like 1 square meter, to the larger ones, like the Beirut River, I mean, my hope is that it empowers people to see that they can actually make change themselves. Like we intentionally made projects that did not need higher government level approvals. Like you could just get away with going to the mayor. And I mean, you're in Lebanon, so you kind of like, someone gives you the number of a cousin who like knows a friend who knows the mayor. So you just call up and you're like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. Like, sure, yeah, why not? So it's like using those like loopholes in the system to make it work to your advantage, and to show people that you can actually do things that are, like at your own individual level. I think that gives people hope that they can affect change themselves.
Yeah. So let's talk about what's next for the project, and then open it up for questions. I have another question after this, and then we'll open up for questions.
Actually, like in a few weeks, we're going to be expanding the Beirut RiverLESS Forest. So now we're at 500 square meters, 2,000 trees and shrubs, and we'll be expanding by another 800 square meters.
Oh.
So that's like a big part coming up that we will be preparing for starting in the next 10 days, and that we'll be planting between October and November. So, and there we're creating also a public space. And the idea is that in maybe like 4 or 5 years, you'd be able to get to that public space and forget that you're in the city. So you'd be so disconnected, surrounded by so much greenery and so much like noise of like birds and insects and all of that, that you kind of really don't recognize where you are anymore. So that's like what's, like happening in the very, short future. But it's also about, but we're also looking to kind of expand. So as I was talking about scaling, exponentially scaling the impact. And I think it can't really be done just in Lebanon because the scale is too small. And so this is why we're looking into expanding into the region. So places like Saudi or Egypt, or places where, there is a big need, there's very little water, there's a big will to green cities. And so I think we have a good opportunity to do it the right way.
So here's my question before we open it up. Let's say you take a highly dense neighborhood like Hamra, and where every square inch is valuable real estate, and every square inch people are fighting over. Could I possibly, I have a square meter on my balcony, I have square meters on my roof. how can we like forest those places? And is that a ridiculous idea?
It's not a ridiculous idea, but it's not a great use of resources, and it's not tilting the scale in terms of mitigating the climate crisis. So it can work on an individual level. For me, there's just too many resources because those places on balconies, rooftops, will never become self-sufficient. So you will always need to use water resources, and you will need to artificially, whether it's organic fertilizer or chemical fertilizers, you're going to have to use that. You're going to have to treat also for all sorts of diseases and things because the plants are not in their natural habitat. So this idea of self-sufficiency is, I think, what's important with the Miyawaki method. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing that. I think you should be doing that, but it's not the main. So there was this project a few years ago, let's green all the rooftops of Beirut. And there was, like funding and so many people. But that's just really wasting resources in the wrong place. I think what you should be doing on rooftops is actually planting food. So urban farming is really important. You can get all the benefits from, the greenery, the biophilia, the mental benefits and all of that. But at the same time, your resources that you're putting in are, turning into food that you're actually consuming. You're shortening your food miles, you're not importing your food and all of that. So I think that's a much better use of those types of spaces.
Okay, cool. Our first question comes from my dad. 1 second. We're going to open it up to questions. Let me unmute him. He always makes fun of me because I call him Brahim. So Brahim, you're the first question. I'm unmuting you.
Thanks, Mikey. Actually, I wanted to know if you were involved in covering the river with solar panels and whether it was made in a proper way or not.
So definitely not. It was actually, so this was the moment in 2013 when I read about this project, and coming from an environmental architecture background, I'd been fighting to have like renewable energy in Lebanon, all of this. So, you read this like, oh, amazing, like a renewable energy plant in Lebanon. And then you're like on top of the Beirut River, like, what the hell, why? There's so many empty rooftops, so much space that you could actually have done this project on. Why make that river even more artificial than it actually is? So you're kind of missing the point because I mean, it's not enough to talk about renewable energy. Like, we need to talk about a sustainable, inclusive, equitable city. And putting, further making your natural assets artificial is not a way to do that. And you're further alienating the people in Burj Hamoud who have to now deal with the visual impact of those solar panels, the heat that is generated, and all sorts of other things as well. So no, I was definitely against. I mean, that's the project that actually put me on track to do what I'm doing.
Okay, so we have that project to thank inadvertently. Okay, Adib, I have another question for you. Are there examples of cities that have dealt with this level of sort of corruption and incompetence at a sort of governance level and a political level that have eventually sort of turned it around and made real progress?
I mean, Medellin is like the first one that comes to mind. They've completely flipped the narrative. They've done so much investment in public infrastructure, in changing the whole corrupt system that was there, and really thinking about citizens' needs and nature's needs as well. And so they're actually working on their river rehabilitation project that was won by two super young architects who are in their 20s. So really kind of forward-looking city and mayor that's completely flipped the story around from a crime-ridden city to like a much more like inclusive, equitable city that has become much more pleasant and very forward-looking, and has become an example for cities around the world. So yeah, it is possible.
Yeah. We just need the Medellin mayor. Okay, Richard, you're up next.
Hi. Yeah, I'm trying to get away from the whole political type thing, like the High Line or the Sky Garden in Seoul versus Beirut. You've got two very different sort of scenarios there. But what about you mentioned that green roofs aren't, your preference would be towards urban farming as opposed to green roof as a strategy. Is that based on location? In other words, would you answer the question the same if we were talking about New York City roofs or Madrid roofs? Is there a larger math that's at work here?
Definitely. I mean, this is kind of like a broad comment, but if we're looking, so in cities where you have a lot more rain, you can have these green roofs that more or less maintain themselves and so don't need much input. You have these inaccessible roofs which are planted with sedum, which doesn't really need much maintenance or much water. And they become really important places for biodiversity in the city, for urban pollinators to thrive. So there are definitely good places to use them. And they also act on slowing down the flow of water, when it's raining. So holding it up on roofs, holding it up on balconies before it kind of gets to the street and gets washed away into the sewage network. So they definitely do have their advantages. But again, like you see in New York, you see in Brooklyn, these big urban farm rooftops, which are producing so much food organically and really reducing the food deserts, reducing the amount of miles that you have to drive to get to ship this food and all of that. So everything has its own, has its pros and cons. But I was specifically referring to Lebanon, given the fact that we have poor infrastructure, we have very little resources. Structurally, our buildings, a lot of the buildings in the city are not meant to withstand this type of weight. And it's just the easy green solution that, it's just like, let's paint all the rooftops green, and that's it. So that's mostly what I was referencing. So it can definitely have big impacts in depending on the location.
So we have a question from Fuad. Fuad, I'm asking you to unmute.
Great, thanks. So you said that for the future, you would think in expanding the project and the experiment to other places in the area and the region. Have you thought of something that would accelerate it, like a manual or a methodology, publishing a methodology that is actually oriented and directed specifically for the context of the region, the mentality of the people, and would actually help in accelerating the project in other communities that are interested but lack the experience and the technicality of doing this?
Yes, definitely. So actually working on something that on two different things. One of them with A Forest, and they've been through a crowdfunding campaign that they did. They raised funds to make tutorial videos of the Miyawaki method in different contexts, in different languages. So I think they're looking at like 9 different languages. So to really be able to expand that and for it to be accessible to people. So the methodology is open source. And so they're looking to do one of the videos in Arabic, so that I would be filming here while doing one of the forests here. Now with COVID and all of these plans are kind of like on hold for a bit, but this is definitely the long-term plan. And I'm also working on another thing, but it's still too early to kind of like talk about it, to again expand the awareness raising and to make this methodology again more accessible to people throughout the region.
Cool. Okay, if you're interested in learning more about Adib's work, you can search The Other Dada or The Other Forest. There's a ton of information online. It's easy to connect with him. Adib, thanks so much for taking the time to do this and for all of your work, obviously, and for sharing your perspective.
Thanks, Mikey, for hosting.
Thank you so much for attending, and see you soon.